Welcome back, folks. Bob McKenzie, Bolton Woodworking here. I hope you enjoyed the last 3 episodes that I posted on the build for the 8 bar stools. For my next project, I thought I'd try something a little bit simpler, and I ran across a set of plans out of the Rockler catalog for a bar height Adirondack chair. This will be great for the outside use on the patio or the deck. I'll go through the build and then explain to you a few of the tweaking I will do before I go ahead and build several more. Hope you enjoy it. Before I went off and built a half a dozen of these, I wanted to put together a prototype. To do that, I used some select pine that I bought at the big box store. This is the relatively straight stuff with no knots. I ripped the 1x6s to a little bit over 2 inches wide and glued together the stock for the legs and frame, which ultimately will be 1.5 by 2 inches. I used a trusty paint scraper to clean up one edge before I went to the planer. As I indicated, I was shooting for 2 inches. The plans came with a set of patterns made out of corrugated cardboard. I took those, traced them out on 1/4 inch MDF to make more permanent pattern stock. I roughed out the patterns on the table saw and then headed over to the band saw, trimming just up to the lines. A little 80 grit sandpaper took out the bandsaw blade marks and brought me up to the lines. These things don't need to be perfect. It is outside furniture after all. The footrest didn't come with a pattern. As you can see, I took a steel rule, put it between the jaws of a clamp and bent it just enough to get the bow I was looking for. The upper back support required cutting 2 angled edges. One where it would nest in with the back legs at 11 degrees, and then the interior curve, which would be at 7 degrees, to line up with the slope of the back slats. Next up were the seat slats. There were 10 of these, and they were 1.5 inches wide, 3/4 inch thick. I didn't bother about running these through the planer on edge. There are 7 back slats, 26 inches long. I used a stop on the fence so that I could do repetitive cutting. The back slats are tapered from 2 3/4 inch down to 2 1/8 inch. The taper jig I'm using is one I bought way too many years ago from Sears when Craftsman were about the only tools you could get. I took equal parts of the taper off of both edges. After tapering the back slats, I laid them down on a flat surface, clamping them together. I struck a straight line across the bottom and then put a 20-inch radius arc across the top. I use a disposable trammel for this. Here I am at the bandsaw trimming off the back slats. The legs and the top support are put together with a lap joint. This lap joint is at 11 degrees. I set the miter on the table saw at 11 degrees for my first cut, and from then on I only adjust the angle using the saw blade and the miter. I never go back and try to recreate the exact 11 degrees using the scale on the miter. So now that I've got all of the pieces cut to length with the appropriate 11-degree angle on each end, I now lay it out and put the marks where the jointery goes. With the dado blades in, I set up the fence at the 2-inch mark so that I can start cutting the lap joints. Do a final check of the depth and ready for a trial run. The trial run was successful. I'm good to go. After everything was cut to length, I marked and drilled all those pieces I could with a 3/8 inch countersink for a plug. I laid the frame pieces out on the workbench and assembled them, gluing them and using Kreg pocket screws. I'll take a moment here to tell you where I deviated from the plans. Instead of using carriage bolts for assembly, I used the screws and plugs. Before I did any further assembly, I spent some time rounding over all the edges with an 1/8 inch roundover bit. I moved on to assembly of the seat itself. I first went over to the router table with the pattern and a flush trim bit and finished up on the sides. Here I am assembling the slats to the seat itself. I'm using a 1/2 inch spacer between slats. The last slat is not installed until after final assembly. At this point, I went ahead and installed the plugs and cleaned them up before I installed the seat to the framework. The next step to assembly of the chair was to put together the lower brace. This is where building a prototype really helps. It gives you the relationship between these members. For instance, the cross member in the lower brace is the same width as the seat less 1.5 inches, or twice the thickness of the seat sides. Here I am installing the seat itself. If you'll note, these joints are the ones that the plan calls for carriage bolts. Here I am installing the armrests. If you'll notice, the upper back support is just clamped on for spacing. I'll install it after I get the armrests firmly attached. Attaching the lower backrest, note the last slat on the seat is still missing. Putting the back slats on in this manner is very tedious. Having done this now with the prototype, I'll feel more comfortable mounting the slats to the lower back support first before I mount that to the chair. Then it's just a means of splaying the slats out visually and then attaching them to the upper support. Once I finally got the back slats installed, I put the plugs in and then mounted the last back slat of the seat. With the footrest mounted, I'm done with assembly. I flipped the chair over, taped the ends of the legs, and coated the ends with epoxy. This helps keep chipping the edges when dragging it across the floor, as well as seals the end from weeping of moisture causing rotting. Even though this is a prototype chair, I do intend to use it, so I am going to go ahead and finish it. I put 2 coats of this finish on, wiping each coat off after about 30 minutes of soak time. A few little things that I would do differently next time around is the upper and the lower back support. Before I cut those out, I will laminate 2 boards together. That gives you a little bit thicker place to land your screws when putting the back slats in. The other thing I would do is, the back's a little too straight up and down for me. I will bring this back probably about 3/4 to an inch more of an angle. Right now the inside of the slope is at 7 degrees. I'll probably make that about 10 or 11 degrees. Well folks, there you go. One prototype down, a handful more to come. I hope to come up with a table to go along with these out of my own design, and if so, I'll put that on the YouTube channel as well. And until then, remember, happy woodworking.